Grant Review Committee meeting. My name is Rima Atung. I am the program coordinator for the marijuana grant. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be discussing the 2023 to 2025 request for grant proposals that is underway right now, and the single preliminary application we received for that. First, I want to go ahead and do our regular housekeeping. Just a reminder, this is a public meeting, so it is being recorded. There may be members of the public here, and just to be clear, I'm going to be addressing the Grant Review Committee during this meeting. If you're a member of the public, there's going to be a few minutes opportunity for public comment towards the end of the presentation. So please wait until that public comment period for your questions and comments. So from here on out, I'm going to be addressing the GRC. And for you folks, if you have a question or comment, please raise your hand and or interrupt vocally rather than using chat so we can address them appropriately as part of the recording for this meeting. As I mentioned, we're discussing that single application in detail. If you have questions about the application, we're going to be discussing it together and taking note of those questions. Please make record of it that way rather than asking the grantee directly if they happen to be on the meeting. So, we have ways built in the process to incorporate your questions and feedback already. So we want to use that as best as we can. And we'll talk specifically about that feedback mechanism a little bit more later on. So let's go ahead and get started. Here's our agenda for today, just introductions and roll call. We're going to go through our roles and expectations like we do in every meeting. We're going to look in detail for that at that new application. Then we'll have the public comment period and our next steps. In the spirit of full disclosure, like I said, some of these slides are going to look really familiar to you since we just met in March, going through, our roles and introductions and everything. We have to do that at the top of every meeting, but we're just going to try and breeze right through since we just went over them so recently. I also want to note that we had set aside from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. for this meeting, but I do not anticipate it taking that long. And then we can discuss the schedule for the next GRC meeting towards the end as well, just based on how long this actually takes to get through. So first, let's do the introductions and roll call. We just did introductions at the top of the last meeting, so I think we can just skip right on over to roll call if that's okay with everyone. So Shelby, do you mind doing the roll call for folks?
Yes, no problem.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. So to start from the top, is Tyler Bechtel present?
I am here.
Thank you. And Rob Bovet? Aaron Felton?
Here.
Chris Gibson?
Here.
Lauren Henderson? Excuse me.
Here.
Thank you. Kathy Kesey?
I'm here.
Craig Prinz?
Present.
Constantine's
out this week.
Thank you. Shannon Savell?
Here.
And Tim Svensson? Thank you.
All right, that's great. So it looks like we have 7 members present. We have quorum. That's fantastic news. Thank you again for everyone that responded to our inquiries about attendance. This is a busy time of year. There are a lot of folks out on vacation. We've had various projects set up meetings and then schedule with or have trouble with the scheduling and have to reschedule in the middle of the meeting because they didn't have quorum. So we really appreciate it. And it also helps us to meet those timelines that we establish so we can move forward with the program. So I'm sure our grantees appreciate it as well. So next up, we'll just do a quick run through of the roles and expectations. So as per usual, our CJC staff did the preliminary review and analysis of the application we received. We looked at it for adherence to rules, priorities, program preferences, and all that stuff. We did an initial scoring. Your role today is to look at all that information that we have for you, talk in detail about any discussion points you have from looking over that application, and then provide recommendations and questions. We're actually going to, the way that this application process is we built in feedback time. So your discussion will get distilled down in an email. We'll send it to the applicant. They'll have time to actually respond to those questions and comments in their final application. And at that point, they'll also submit the budget. So, our goals for today are really to look in detail at that application, gather your feedback, and get it prepared to send to them so they can submit that final. And then after that, they'll submit the final application. We'll have an additional GRC meeting in August. August 7th is when we have time set aside for that. And we'll take your full recommendation at that point, including the funding recommendation, and bring that to the commission in August. So that's kind of what your role is and the timeline coming up. Just a reminder, since you are serving as public officials in your role as GRC members, you do have some ethical responsibility to disclose any actual or potential conflicts of interest. For the purposes of this, a conflict of interest occurs when you as a public official participates in an action which could result in financial benefit to you or a relative or a business that you are associated with. So we ask that you, if you think you have a potential conflict or an actual conflict, please let us know. Is there anyone at this time that thinks they have a conflict with Safety Compass, our applicant? Nope, I'm not seeing anyone, any hands raised. That's great, but just keep it in mind if something does come up, please, proactively inform us so we can make note of that. All right, let's just jump into the background and timeline. Again, this should all look very familiar to you. This is the background for the funding program. What we're focused on here today is the bottom, this 2023 to 2025 biennium, where we have an appropriation of $11 million for the biennium. In our last meeting, we took that appropriation and we decided to allocate $9.3 million to maintain and expand our current grantees programs. So that has been completed. As of today, I think there are 2 contract amendments that are still in the process of getting signed. Everyone else has their funds. They should be getting their first disbursement in July. So that part is done. Everybody should be happy there. What we're, discussing today is that remaining $1.7 million that we put out for a request for grant proposals. As I said, we only got 1 applicant. Based on their proposal, I don't think we're going to use the full 1.7 million. So I'm anticipating that at our next meeting, we're going to have a conversation of whatever that remainder is, how we want to allocate that. But we'll have to discuss that once we actually get the budget. So again, just a real quick reminder, these are the administrative rules that are applicable to the program. We also have general rules for all grants in our grant management handbook. And then the grantees also must comply with whatever specifics are included in the request for proposals. The eligible applicants that we can fund are cities and counties and community-based organizations, or a combination of the above. And then here's a listing out of the legislative and commission priorities. I'm not going to read them through again, but we have them there for reference in case anyone wants to flip back and look at them. We did at our last meeting identify an additional commission priority, and that is, of the available funds, the commission prioritized up to $400,000 for eligible community-based organizations. that apply to provide these services. And that was completely based on your folks' discussion and the reflection that especially in certain parts of the state, there's kind of a dearth of services and partnerships between CBOs and law enforcement that are really targeting those victims of human trafficking associated with the illegal marijuana market. So, the commission took your recommendation, added that to the RFGP. So we do have that prioritization in there as well. So again, this is the timeline. So we are at July 1st. So preliminary applications already in. Later today after our meeting, I'm going to open up that final application and send the feedback to our single applicants. July 22nd, the application is going to be due. And then our GRC committee is scheduled for August 7th. And then August 28th is our anticipated date to present everything to the commission. So we got we actually ended up extending the timeline, and we did a lot of more outreach to folks than we usually do because we saw there was a low return when we were initially waiting for that preliminary application. So we actually did more than usual. We still only got one response, but we went through the full analysis process for that response just to, honor our process and make sure we really look at it and are, dotting all I's and crossing all T's and all of that. So on the staff analysis side, what we did was we reviewed the application for those rules and requirements. We did an initial staff scoring using a scoring rubric, which we'll get into in a second. We did that review of how the application aligned with legislative and commission priorities. And then we kind of put together a brief list of some points that you folks might want to discuss. I'm sure, if you had a chance to read the application, you might have some of your own that you want to discuss, but just as a starting point, we included some. Any questions or comments so far? No? All right. So here's just a visual of the scoring rubric. I do want to note, so, there's the cover sheet section, which isn't scored, program overview, which had 3 sections, possible of 0 to 5 points for each section, with 5 being like the best, most complete answer and 0 being they didn't answer it. We also broke out the priority assessment so that each legislative and each commission priority could get up to 2 points per one. There's 5 of each. The reason we did it this way is in years previous, we just kind of lumped them all together and applicants could respond to any or all of the commission priorities, and organizing the responses based on the completeness of the response and how many priorities they addressed was a little difficult because we didn't break out the scoring enough. So we tried to rectify that this time. But with our one application, it just looks kind of funny because they only hit on certain priorities. So I just wanted to make note of that. And then the last 2 areas that are scored here, the responses to GRC questions and the program budget. Obviously, we haven't been able to score that yet because that's not going to be available till the final application is open. So just an overview of Safety Compass, which is the applicant for our single application. They are a new or implementation program. It's a community-based organization. They have listed, agency collaborations with county human trafficking task forces, of which they actually provided MOUs for Clackamas, Marion, and Washington that seems to be already in place, with the DOJ, Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission, federal and local law enforcement, and then CBOs. The proposed service area is Clackamas, Washington, and Marion, and Multnomah. And just basically the program seeks to coordinate multidisciplinary meetings and trainings with law enforcement and social service providers to provide education and organized service networks for those victims of human trafficking that are impacted by illegal marijuana market. So that's very much in line with our priorities and that additional commission priority. So some of the justification that they included for why those funds are needed is a lack of resources to support those victims of labor trafficking. They're looking specifically for funds to support a director of labor trafficking to provide that coordination and training. And also to help do some of the preliminary analysis to create an outreach plan. And they listed various, agencies to collaborate with to gather that information, like BOLI, FBI, immigration attorneys. And then once they identify where the need is and kind of create that network, they'll find the victims themselves and connect them to advocacy and support and case management services. And as I mentioned, they have those MOUs with the 3 different counties in place already that have a variety of law enforcement, et cetera, that have signed off on the MOU. So any questions or comments about that piece yet? I can go through all of the staff analysis parts and then we can kind of cycle back if we need to look at any specific slides, if that makes sense. I see people nodding, so we'll just do that. So this is the staff scoring. So what we did is we had a team of 3 people do scores separately. And then we came together, averaged them out, and discussed why we gave each section the different score. So, out of the total 25 points possible, and I did want to just point out again, the 10 points for the legislative and priority elements, not a lot of people are going to hit all 10. They got a total of 14 points, so they're kind of middle of the road in terms of responses from our perspective. They seemed appropriate, they were on target, but some additional information would be helpful, is basically why they got those scores. So some of the areas that we kind of noted that we might want to discuss further is, in the problem scope, they were talking about some of the need in the rural areas of those counties related to agricultural industries being a hub for illegal marijuana grows and exploitation of vulnerable populations, which absolutely is on point for what we hear. I think we just would like a little additional information on how it's specific to those counties. And then they also mentioned a few things like housing, but it's not clear how it fits in with the problem or proposed scope of services. Craig, I see you have your hand up. Would you like to add to that?
No, just I think it's really important, like you just said, that service area for me coming in here. I'm sorry, let me put my hand down. That's the hardest part once you raise your hand, guys.
True.
So much of what we've been hearing about and what we've been focused on as far as illegal and exploitative marijuana grows has been in Josephine, Jackson, and to some extent Klamath counties. And so hearing about, I'm not very aware of what's going on in these counties in the metro area. So I think really making sure that we all understand, or your commissioners understand, the problem in that area, because I think Table Rock has, and understandably everything's been focused in Southern Oregon, where most of the outdoor outdoor grows are. And so I'd love to know more about what's happening in the illegal market in these counties, and I'm not educated on it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and we can definitely, see if they have additional information available. We've heard sort of anecdotally from various places, including some of the law enforcement agencies when we did our visits last year, that there are issues there, but we really don't have numbers on it, and we might not have numbers on it until we have more services there, but it would be great if they could provide additional information. So we can absolutely include that comment. And it looks like Lauren has a hand up as well.
Yeah, Craig got my hand up. Craig, I absolutely agree with you, because this statement in this area is a little bit of a surprise for me, that there is the housing comment is a broad comment about agriculture housing in general, and the things that are going on there, and the state is funding some things to help meet the OSHA rules. That's another funding thing, but I worry a little bit that's a very broad statement, and if it isn't, it would be good to get more information. Marion, Clackamas, those counties are in the top 5 for agriculture in our state. Not necessarily the most rural, though, where Craig was talking about in Southern Oregon. So yeah, anything you can get there would be valuable.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So that sounds like it's very much going to be included in our follow-up questions for them. So thank you for both adding your comments on that. And I think one thing that the staff discussed was they mentioned housing, but it's not really tied to anything. So I think just some more information in general about how that might play into the scope of services would be helpful. And then for the program description, they focused it on the funds are going to support this director of labor trafficking. And I think the questions that we have about that were kind of around how does this program, how will it align or overlap with their existing human trafficking task forces? Is there going to be a component that's focused specifically on those marijuana impacted human trafficking victims? And then how does that advocacy piece tie into it? And then again, they may not have included this just because we didn't have them submit the budget at this point, but it would be good to see the FTE for that position. And if there would be any, from my reading of that section, I didn't see that they had stated there would be FTEs for the advocates as well, but that could just be an overlook on my part or something. So I wouldn't mind more information on that too. So, any comments, questions related to that section specifically? Do folks feel like that's a good synthesis of the missing information, or do we need to add more?
I really appreciate the way that you've summarized it, particularly the piece that you just hit on with the FTE. Being a director and coordinating with the entities that they're currently engaged in is going to be pretty comprehensive. I wasn't sure when I was reading it about a plan for expansion or outreach to Southern Oregon, where there is so much of the need, but then also the question about corresponding, like once you do the outreach, presumably you're going to increase services, and how is that going to be accomplished if the FTE is solely with the outreach and the facilitation, but not with the actual service provision? So I think that you've actually covered this really well. I appreciate it.
Okay, and I'm just taking notes while we're recording and taking notes. Just make sure we have it down right. So I apologize for the delay. Okay, excellent. So if there aren't any more comments on that specific piece, we'll move on to the program's desired outcomes. And like I said, just in the previous comment, there weren't any specific outcomes related to housing. It was really about the outreach piece of it and the training piece of it. And then we just had an additional question about the service levels, wondering if they're achievable, just because, in one of our CBOs has had really, they kind of were an established program already, and they've had a ton of luck drawing people in. The Legal Services Consortium gets like 1 to 200 clients per quarter, versus our other less established CBO hasn't hit those numbers. So we were just trying to get a better idea of how they came up with that estimate and if it's realistic. And I think they only, it wasn't a huge estimation of people served. I think it was 20 individuals for the advocacy piece and then 200 supportive contacts, which seems like it should be reasonable, but it would be helpful just to have that background on how they came up with those numbers, for me at least. Any questions or comments from you folks on that? No. If not, we'll go through to the next analysis piece, which is just these legislative and commission priorities. So we just kind of highlighted where they responded to specific priorities. In terms of the legislative priorities, their proposed project directly aligns with that priority number 5, to support programs that address the ongoing humanitarian crisis. In terms of the commission priorities, they're really focused on increasing collaborative partnerships, which is one of the priorities, and then providing those trauma-informed, culturally specific and responsive services. They do mention that list of English, Spanish, Russian, Somali, Ukrainian, and intent to add Mandarin speaking advocates, which is fantastic. And then their proposed program also supports that additional commission priority, with the $400,000 prioritized for CBOs. So they fit in really well with the legislative and commission priorities. And this is just a reminder of the funding categories. So the last kind of, the next slide we go through, we'll get back to how we're going to submit the feedback to them. So this is just kind of a reminder of what types of funding categories we support with this grant. That's pretty broad: personnel, contractual, equipment, supplies, training, rent, utilities, and then that 10% of total other costs as an admin cost. So part of what we can do is we can actually recommend that they prioritize funding in a certain way. Again, we don't have their numbers, but we could say, based on your preliminary application, we think you might want to increase your personnel funding to make sure your program is fully supported, or something kind of general like that they could respond to. So this is just kind of a reminder of those categories before we get into the specifics. So the next step is to send them this response letter. This is the text of it there, and then on the right side, just detailing out the sections where we would like a little more information, or to direct, specific recommended use of funding. So let's just, take a minute and have a little additional discussion and see if there's anything else that we want to include. So far we have those points that folks pointed out in terms of, the program overview, defining the scope of need a little bit better, specifically in that geographic area, identifying where the housing component fits in, and then those other comments that folks have already given. So let's just open it up for discussion and see if anything else comes up.
This is Kathy from Limited in Medford. My concern is with the proposal is there's going to be a director coordinating the services of human trafficking, but is it really, what percentage of that FTE is actually going to really be 100% focused on illegal marijuana? Because it seems to me like it's maybe a way to cover like a needed position, but I'm interested in finding out really what percent of that position will be covering illegal marijuana.
I think that is a great point.
This is Chris Gibson. I think it's probably already kind of been said or hinted about, but to be more specific, I would like to see more justification of the problem and the solution that they're proposing, as far as the labor trafficking piece of this goes.
Okay.
And maybe, I mean, just throwing it out there, and you know, what coordination, if any, has been done to kind of identify the threat, with the law enforcement partners that are in those areas, since they're the ones that are going to be calling and utilizing the services also.
Yeah, that is another great point. Does anyone have any additional thoughts to add about that?
I'll go ahead and speak. Tyler
Sure.
Bechtel, State Police. You know, my concern with outreach, training, and coordination is where we're at when we're at these illegal grows is we need response. We're able to recognize signs of labor trafficking. In Oregon, it's completely different in the north than it is the south, and there is a lot of attention there. But
Mhm.
you know, we're regularly encountering marijuana grows where, you know, 5 to 10 people will be living in a house, but every room in that house is also being used to grow marijuana. So they're sleeping in tents outdoors, or you know, maybe all sleeping on a kitchen floor, stuff like that. The level of education that we need to recognize the signs of labor trafficking there is very little. What we're needing is a culturally competent response. And I think that I'm left with a lot of questions on how this grant would address that.
And this is Kathy again, and I think there was some mention as well about on-site at a bust. And my experience, because we've served a lot of workers in Southern Oregon, they're not going to say anything on site about any type of human trafficking because they don't know who's around them. They don't know who's listening. They don't know what's going to be shared. It takes us, like organization like ours, to come in 2 weeks later, and then they finally start talking once we're able to establish that level of trust. So I think I'm my concern when I saw that it's going to be on-site resources are available. No one's going to speak on site. No one, especially if they're being trafficked, and especially if they're, you know, have an issue like their family's going to be killed in Mexico or something if they don't pay, you know, or whatever, if they report. So
Yeah.
I think I think there has to be that level of trust. And like the gentleman was saying about the cultural responsiveness, that really has to be a strong component, especially because we're dealing with a lot of different cultures, not just Latino culture or other cultures like that.
Yeah, I think that's great a great point as well. So far the main points are, you know, additional justification or description of what the problem is specifically in those county areas, and how they're going to respond in a culturally responsive way to people that where on-site services may not be the best way to engage them. And then there's also, I don't know how to word, I'm just thinking out loud, so I'm not sure how to word this, but the coordination and services with law enforcement, what Tyler was saying. Needing a culturally competent response more than maybe the outreach and training piece. Is there anything else that folks are kind of concerned with or where they would like additional information?
When you were fleshing those things out, one of the things that occurred to me, I think, in listening to Kathy talk was that it's not just maybe clarification, but I think maybe we're asking them to fully explain the issues they've identified in the counties in which they work and how what they're proposing is going to specifically address that. I mean, because listening to Kathy speak actually caused me some concern, because if you've got providers that are in the field working with the population now and talking about, you've got both ends. You've got, I'm sorry, the gentleman who just noted that they don't have issues with identifying because this is how it unfolds. And then Kathy saying, and we work with these folks regularly and it's not on site
Right.
response that's needed. It's kind of like, well, then is there a lack of understanding about the population that's going to be served? Or is it just so fundamentally different in these other counties? And if so, and it very well could be, I don't know a thing about it. But I think then it's not really, I'm personally not asking for clarification. It's really like, you need to kind of walk us through this. Does that make sense?
Yep, it absolutely does. Thank you for providing that additional explanation. And I see a hand raised.
Oh, it's mine, Lauren.
Oh.
My camera went off. So, Kathy and Shannon, I think, nailed it. I'm sitting here struggling, trying to figure out if they get this money, this is going to be the outcome, and this is how it's actually going to move the dial or change things. And that's what I'm struggling with, but I think Kathy and Shannon said it a lot better than that.
You know, Rima, I don't know if it'll help, but I can speak to anecdotally what we're seeing in those counties, just because that's where I've been operating since 2017 in the illegal marijuana space.
Right.
And I can speak to what I wish I would have had when I was there. And so maybe that would help further the discussion. What we see in I noticed it was Multnomah, Marion, Clackamas, and what was the other county?
Washington.
Washington. Okay. So we have had kind of in the last few years, kind of a growth in the same situation that they're having in Southern Oregon with the cartel grows, as they call them, where you know it's a large number of usually Hispanic people working in those grows. There has been kind of a growth in that over the last few years, but almost since the beginning of legalization, what we've run into is a large portion of indoor grows that are usually facilitated by anywhere from 3 to 10 workers, and they're indoors, so they're a little bit harder to detect, and they're also usually in a rural area down a long driveway, so the neighbors don't even really know about it. These are places that on average are pulling about 30,000 times the power of a regular house, or 30 times the power of a regular house. 1,000 kilowatt hours is the average house. They're pulling 30,000 kilowatt hours. And in these grows, it's primarily Chinese people, and it's primarily people from Taishan City in the Guangdong province. So it's very specific. And then we run into some Yaomen and Hmong trimming crews, and they make about $100 a day to trim a pound and a half. And we've gone into grows and found as many as 25 people working at once. And on a person's phone that was running them, pictures of all of their passports. So things like that would point to labor trafficking. So for us, it's in Northern Oregon, it's dominated by indoor Chinese grows, but there has been a growth of outdoor or hoop house grows like in Southern Oregon over the last few years. And that's all anecdotal. The same problem remains in both situations. And I believe it was Kathy that brought it up. Finding cooperation from a victim on site is hard. It's harder when you don't speak the language. And it's even harder than that when you don't understand how they got there, what their support structure is, who do they owe, what debt was secured by their family, etc. So, that's where I see a need is someone who can speak to them, if nothing else, not getting their cooperation on site, but letting them know that this organization exists and is out there for their support. That's something that would be leaps and bounds ahead of what we've had since 2017.
Yeah, I think that's extremely useful context. I see some nodding heads. Does anyone else have anything to add? Or, oh, Craig, looks like you have your hand up again.
I have more of a question, and it might be mostly for Kathy, but it also is context. I know that there is I think an initiative, a citizen initiative petition has been filed for November about labor peace agreements for cannabis workers. Kathy, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I just wanted to raise it because I think there's always this confusion or just this want to make sure people have clarity about these are completely, my understanding that the focus area is completely unlicensed. These are completely unlicensed premises. But I wanted to just give context and background, I think, because it's different than what we were used to seeing in Medford and Jackson County and Josephine County. Just want to make sure in the counties we're talking about, I think of there being more robust labor organizations, more robust assistance. So just making sure that, I guess my question is, was it clear to you in the application that folks had that delineation between, yes, this is a licensed premises, or no, it's not? And because I know this is coming up as far as labor rights for cannabis workers and the ability to have a talk to employees of a licensed premises. I'm curious if Kathy's got any background on that, because this is an area I really don't know much about.
I'm not aware of that measure that's coming up. And honestly, there's I mean, it would be great for licensed ones, but for the unlicensed, of course, they're not going to be compliant. So
Right.
And we're seeing a lot. I mean, in the grows down here, we're starting to see a lot more. There's a lot of like U.S. citizens, right, who are working. And one of the last guys that we saw, they actually sicked their dogs on him, and he ended up in the hospital because of dog bites and infections and things. So that it's getting dicier. I honestly think it's getting a little dicier. Now, down here, my understanding is that law enforcement isn't finding trimming at the grows anymore, at the where they're growing. They're kind of wondering like where the trimming is happening, because it's not on site anymore where it used to be, because then they could bust the whole, they take all the product and things. But now I think that's kind of a different aspect of now trying to figure out like where the trimming and things is happening.
One more area, just apologies, just educating myself. I've had emails from, I think it was Oregon Law Center, that I think already works in this area. And so that's another one of my questions, is because we're in a different area with, I think, more possibilities for coordination with other organizations. Is that part of how you assess this? Because that's, again, my understanding is there are some grantees, probably CJC grantees, that are active in these counties. Rima, I just want to make sure that is that correct, that there would be some other grantees, and is whether or not there's a coordination, is that something that's kind of scored by staff?
So the answer to your first question, yes, we do have a grantee that operates statewide, but is located in the Portland area. And that's that Oregon Law Center and consortium of different legal services and other types of services, including UNETE. So, that's Kathy's piece as well. And they coordinate with a lot of the different agencies that were mentioned in this application. We scored it based on whatever the language in the, the rules and requirements specific to this funding stream are, but they're not as detailed as perhaps we would like them to be. So it just kind of generally asks, are you coordinating with these things? We can try and phrase it a little bit more specifically when we follow up in this letter, and see if they're aware of other, say something like, are you aware of any other initiatives by CEOs or CBOs or law enforcement in your area? And if so, how do you propose to connect with those? Something like that. Okay, I see your thumb up, so I will include that. Just write down the wording before I forget. Okay. Yeah, all great points. And this is always a learning process for us too. I think we tried to make the responses a little bit more specific and shorter this time, and maybe that kind of bit us in the back end, because some of their responses are not specific enough. They're kind of general. So I think having this additional follow-up process is going to be really valuable for this application. So are there any other points or things that should be included for them to follow up on? So just to reiterate again, what we're going to be asking them for is to explain how they identified these issues in these specific locations and how the services they are proposing address those issues and target population specifically. We're going to be asking about the FTE for that director position that's coordinating and doing training, and how much of that FTE is going to be used only for the marijuana aspect, how that is going to tie in with their advocacy piece, and if there are any FTEs that are going to be included in their budget for the advocates so they can actually do that on the ground work. And that ties into, you know, Tyler's concerns and points about how they're actually going to provide those services. And if they discover there's partnerships that don't need as much education and need more actual service, how they're going to work with them and make sure that their service model targets the population in the way that they can be engaged. Clarify the housing piece. And then this last piece that Craig mentioned about, you know, if there are any similar initiatives in the areas you're proposing to serve, how are you going to connect with them? So is there anything else that that was good? Okay. All right. So if there's nothing else coming up for the discussion, I think we're going to go forward to public comment. Well, oh, Craig, did you have something else to say? No, okay. So we're going to go and leave our time for public comment in case there's any members of the public that want to address the GRC. Now is your time. We'll just have a couple minutes silence to see if anyone has public comment. I'm gonna drink something while we wait. I'm not seeing anyone. Anyone making any kind of overtures, so we'll just give it another 30 seconds or so and then move on from public comment. All right. In that case, you know, the recommendation that we're coming to today, again, if I'm hearing correctly, is to move forward with this single application for, is it Safety Compass, to open the final application for them and then to send that feedback in the format that we discussed previously. So if everyone is in consensus about that, we can go ahead and move forward with that recommendation. I see smiles and thumbs up and nods. All right. So we're gonna, is there anyone that does not agree?
And
No?
do you want us to do a vote? Are you saying you'd like a roll call vote, or is that sufficient?
I think that's sufficient for this, since we're just, it's not like a full recommendation. It's just kind of to move on to the next stage in the process. So I think the thumbs up and everything that I got should be sufficient. Thank you. So as mentioned earlier, we're going to send all that feedback to them this afternoon, open up the final application. The deadline for that's July 22nd. Next GRC meeting is on August 7th. So since we only have one application, we had 4 hours allocated for that meeting, similar to this meeting. I'm guessing we can reduce that to maybe an hour, hour and a half. You guys think that will be sufficient time? Okay, excellent. So we'll reduce that meeting and send out the agenda and everything, and the budgets once we get them in on the 22nd. And then we'll present your recommendations to the commission meeting at the end of August. So I'm going to say an hour and a half because we probably are going to have to discuss what to do with that remaining part of the allocation as well. So I'll do hour and a half for that meeting. Any other comments or questions? No. I have another picture of my sister's adorable dogs. I have unending pictures.
I saw that, so could you show that picture? Because I have a special surprise.
Can you guys see it? The three.
Look, Rima.
Yeah. Oh my God.
It makes more sense if you see the picture, guys.
Yeah. All right, I guess that's it for today. So thank you guys so much. I really value your discussion and all the points that you brought up. It's so helpful to have your expertise as part of this process. So thank you so much for taking the time for this meeting. And we'll be in touch for the next steps.
Thank you so much for your work on this.
Yes.
Thank you to everyone, and thank you for some familiar faces, new faces. Thanks for letting me educate myself a little bit as the new OLCC person. So, Aaron, I know what you were thinking is, yeah, we can do it in an hour if Craig will be quiet. So some things never change.
Oh, I wasn't thinking that, Craig, out loud.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Bye.
Have a good holiday
Have a
week.
nice holiday. Yep.
Yeah.
Bye.
Happy holidays.
Happy holiday. Have
See
fun.
y'all.
Bye.